I don't think I've ever sat down and talked about Anne Rice properly, which is strange because she's not just one of my favourite writers, she's one of those writers that kind of changed the temperature of how you read everything else. Like, after her, things can feel a bit too clean or a bit too safe. And I don't mean better or worse, just safer. And her work never feels safe, it feels exposed. Like someone left the emotional door open a bit too long. So let's talk about Anne Rice. I'm Garth James, welcome to this episode. Like, sub, do the usual, leave a comment, tell me what you think. I want to know, and I want to give a shout out to the people who are members, and I want to give a shout out to the Patreon posse. God, I'm that old. Because you guys are amazing as well, and if you want to be part of that, you're welcome to join. So let's talk about the brilliant Anne Rice. First time I picked up Interview with a Vampire, I was expecting something completely different. I think everyone is. The first time, you expect fangs, blood, drama, something loud. And instead, you get this quiet, reflective, almost uncomfortably conversational book about existence. Which, I mean, let's be real, you don't expect that from most vampire novels. And I remember sitting there thinking, why does this feel personal? Because it doesn't read like a story, it reads like someone trying to justify their own lives, which is something that I think is an amazing skill to have in writing. And yeah, I met her, which is still to this day feels completely unreal to say it out loud. Like I'm talking about something that happened to someone else. I got to have a 10-minute conversation with her. I got to hand her a glass of champagne. And when you spend so much time in someone's writing, especially writing that intimate, you feel like you already know them a bit. And I don't mean that like parasocial, creepy thing. I mean you recognize the voice. When I met Anne Rice, it wasn't like some big moment, it was quiet. We talked. I handed her a glass of champagne. And, but there was a very clean sense of, oh, you meant all of it, didn't you? None of this was distant or ironic or detached. You were right there in every page. And I think that's why her books linger the way they do, because they don't feel constructed, they feel lived in. And going back to the Vampire Chronicles, which really gets me now, rereading them, it isn't just the atmosphere, it's inside the books, like the the dynamic between Louis and Lestat. They're not just character conflict, they're philosophy. Louis is guilt, constant suffering guilt that still needs to find meaning in suffering. Lestat is the opposite, or at least he pretends to be. He's indulgent. Survival. He's performance. But the older I get, the more I realise Lestat isn't free. He's just better at pretending he is. And that's such a human thing to write into something that isn't human at all. And the immortality in her books isn't glamorous, it's exhausting. It's the slow build-up of memory, regret, identity shifts, watching the world change where you're stuck in a version of yourself that you don't even recognise anymore. Hello, Claudia. Which again is a very real feeling, just stretched over centuries instead of years. There's an underlying question in so much of her work. If you live long enough, do you become more yourself or less? And she never answers it. She just keeps cycling it. And then there's religion. And I don't mean clean religion or structured belief religion, more like obsession. You feel it in works, all across her works, but especially in the later ones, where she's arguing with religion herself. But it's everywhere, if you look for it. It's not about faith as a comfort, it's about faith as conflict, as doubt, as something that won't leave you alone. And I get the feeling a lot of that was her own internal struggle with spirituality. And I think what makes it interesting is she never fully settles on one side. Even when she moves through different phases in her life, you can still feel the questioning underneath it all. It's never this is the answer, it's always but what if this is wrong? And then you step into the lives of the Mayfair Witches, and everything changes. It's less about the individual and more about inheritance, about what gets passed down whether you want it or not. And The Witching Hour is one of those books where the horror isn't immediate. It builds, it's layered, it repeats until you realise you're not just reading about the characters, you're reading about patterns of human behaviour, which makes it uncomfortable, because it stops being fantasy at this point and starts feeling like history, family, cycles that you don't really break, they just change shape. And then there's Cry to Heaven, which I genuinely think tells you everything about her writing. Her as a writer, if you're paying attention, because there's no supernatural safety net here, no vampires, no witches. Just people, power, control, art, identity, eunuchs. It all feels very intense, which is kind of the point. The Gothic elements were never the core of what she was doing. They are just the lens. Take that away, and the same themes are still there. And I think that's why her influence is really hard to replicate. Because people borrow the aesthetic. They borrow the vampires, the tone, the dependency. But they don't always borrow the vulnerability, or maybe they can't because that level of honesty is uncomfortable to sit in. It makes it easier to write a cool vampire than to write a vampire who hates themselves, who can't stop existing. And I think that's why, for me, I keep coming back to her work. Not because it's easy and not because of nostalgia, but because it feels real in ways that are slightly uncomfortable. Let it sit in that place where it's asking you questions you weren't planning on thinking about that day, and it doesn't let you off the hook. I don't think Anne Rice was trying to give people comfort. She was trying to understand something. Belief, identity, loss. Claudia is her daughter, for example. Lestat is her husband. And also what it means to exist for a long time or just exist in a difficult time. And she just happened to do it through vampires and witches and history and music and all of those different worlds that all cycle the same ideas, which is who you are when you stop pretending to be okay. And maybe that's why her books stay with people, because she doesn't really answer the question. She forces you to sit with it. She forces you to be messy. And she forces you to sit there in this uncomfortable space. Anne Rice is a writer that I had great interactions with online. The people of the page, her Facebook group, it was amazing. I genuinely miss the interactions. I genuinely feel like there aren't any writers like her anymore. There are writers that try to copy her or influenced by her or try to capture the same vibe. And I think one of the biggest things that people forget when they read her work is it's not really about vampires. It's about the human experience, processing it, letting you sit in that place. So I'm going to leave this here. I will talk to you later, and tell me what you think in the comments below. Because am I the only person on this planet that loves her work? Because I find so many people that either ridicule it, don't understand it, or completely obsessed. There's no middle ground.